Hello, and welcome to this month's synth tutorial with computer music. This month, we're going to be using our Zebra CM plugin to recreate one of the most iconic sounds of the 80s. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill has found itself with a new audience thanks to its placement within the latest series of Stranger Things. The original sound was created using a Fairlight computer musical instrument, CMI. It was heavily reliant on a cello sample which formed part of the factory set that shipped with each Fairlight. Consequently, we're not going to create a sound which is absolutely exacting in every detail because we're not working with a sample-based package, but what we can do is create something which has the spirit of that sound and is not a million miles away. So let's begin in our usual way by loading up an instance of the Zebra CM plugin in whichever DAW you choose to use. Having loaded the plugin, go to the menu drop-down at the top of the window and select Init for Initialize at the bottom of the drop-down. Just as a reminder, every time we tweak a pot or a setting on screen, you'll see a value for that being displayed in that upper window, so always keep an eye on that for the most exacting details. We're also going to visit the master pot, which is at the bottom right-hand side of the plugin, because we're going to need to turn the plugin down right away, so change the master volume to a setting of around about 40. So to begin creating our sound, let's go to Oscillator 1 on the left-hand side at the top. We're going to select a waveform which will read 3.20 in the upper display. And while we're in the vicinity of Oscillator 1, let's go to the volume control and change that to a value of 122. We're going to make a very similar setting to Oscillator 2. This time we're going to change the waveform to a value of 4.00, and then we're going to change our volume control to a value of 45. That should yield a rather basic sound that sounds like this. Next, we're going to go to the filter section and we're going to ensure that we've got the low pass LP 12 dB filter selected. As with all of the sounds that we create, you could definitely experiment with different filter types, but we think that the 12 dB filter is the closest for what we need here. Let's now make some alterations to some of the other filter settings. Let's start with the key follow that we need to turn all the way up to 100. Now we can adjust the cutoff control and place that at a value of 12. And we're also going to change the resonance control and set that to a value of 70, that's 70. By placing the resonance control relatively high, it's going to induce a sort of sinusoidal element into our sound, and by turning up the key follow to its maximum of 100, it means that that sinusoidal element will follow around the pitches that we play on the keyboard. We should be hearing something that sounds a bit like this. Now it's time to turn our attention to the envelopes, and we're going to begin with envelope number 1. Envelope number 1 controls the volume, or the amplitude if you prefer, of our sound. So the changes that we need to make are, first of all, the attack phase set to a value of 18, the decay phase set to a value of 43, the sustain phase set to a value of 0, and finally the release phase set to a value of 21. We also need to make some changes to envelope 2. Envelope 2 is actually going to be used to modulate the pitch of our oscillators. So let's begin with the attack phase set to 0, the decay phase set to a value of 25, the sustain phase also set to 0, and the release phase set to a value of 17. Our sound will now sound a little bit like this. So you can hear we've taken the front end attack off the sound. Next, it's time to induce the pitch swooping element of our sound, and we do this by revisiting the oscillators, and we're looking specifically at the tuning pot, and hopefully it'll have envelope 2 written underneath. If it hasn't, make sure that it has by selecting it from the drop-down in the box immediately below the pot. We need to visit the tiny little turquoise circle which you'll find located right next door to the tuning pot in both oscillator sections. By clicking and holding on that circle, you can then incite the amount of modulation that's coming from the envelope. If we move it to a positive value, you'll hear that it will create a swooping from above. If we move it to a negative value, you can hear it'll create a swooping from below. And that's the one that we want. So we recommend that you set your modulation of oscillator number 1 to a value of -10, and very similarly with oscillator 2, set that to a value of -12. And hopefully when you've done both of those, it should sound like this. So that's the main crux of our sound. And you can hear it's not a million miles away from Kate Bush's Fairlight sound, but we need to use some effects to really brighten it up and liven up the sound to make it far more enigmatic. So let's begin by adding some EQ. Because of the way that we're using the filter, the sound is relatively dull. So we can brighten this by just inducing a nice curve in an EQ. We're really brightening that up. If we take it down, you can hear it sounds quite dull. But if we take it up, we can induce that brightness. So don't be afraid to really bring out those upper harmonic colors. And then we also need to use 3 effects in series. We're going to use a delay, we're going to use a compressor, and we're going to use a reverb. And when we add all of those 3 elements, we get this. So let's look at what we're using in turn. First of all, we're using the Ultra Tap from Eventide. You can use any delay, but we quite like this one because we can specify the exact number of taps we want in our delay. You can see that we have 4. So there are 4 repetitions happening in very quick succession. Next, we're just putting a straightforward compressor across the whole thing. You can see that we're using an SSL compressor here, but any compressor you have in your DAW should do a really good job. And then finally, we're using one of the favored reverbs on the market. That's the Eventide Black Hole. And we've got this set to a very, very long reverberation tail, which gives this beautiful sort of eerie back-end color. Now, you can use any reverb you like, but whatever you use, set it to a very generous reverb time. So that's it for this month. We'll see you next time.